Hi foodies! On today's episode, we're thrilled to be joined by none other than James Beard award-winning content creator and the creative genius behind FEATR, the innovative food media publisher that champions Filipino food globally. For over 10 years, he's been pushing Filipino food into the global spotlight with his blogs, vlogs, and documentaries. We'll explore his path into content creation and get a behind-the-scenes look at what drives his work. Plus, we'll uncover a side of him that his audience rarely get to see. Let's sit back, relax, and grab a bite with Erwan Heusaff.
Hey foodies, what's up? Welcome back to Grab a Bite. Today's guest is a writer, content creator, and entrepreneur. But above all, he's a master storyteller. He's been creating content for more than a decade now, and he's made quite an impact in the culinary world. Not just here in the Philippines, but also globally. So guys, let's all welcome Erwan Heusaff on the show. What's up, Erwan?
What's up? Thanks for having me.
Guys, let's give him a warm welcome. Come on, let's go, guys. We normally do our intros like that, like hype ourselves up.
Yeah.
So Erwan, how have you been? Kamusta?
Good. I mean, it's been a crazy past couple of years, but I think both in my personal life and in my professional life, things have been falling into place, which is great.
I know. You've said in one of the podcasts that you visited, you started that from a blog, and then turned into a vlog. Now you're basically a full media production. So how's it been?
Good. I mean, so when we started, there was no such thing as content creators.
Mm-hmm.
There was no such things as digital jobs unless you were in publishing for blogs mostly. So technically everyone was a writer, right? So I started with that, written blogs, but video was always there. So video for me was secondary. It was just to bring in a visual component. I didn't want to take pictures. So it was a visual component to the recipe and the blogs that I was doing. So that was kind of like my first foray into it. And then because of how the internet evolved and because of how we started consuming content, then I kind of just adapted, ideally kind of a few years earlier so that I'm on trend, adapted with the evolution of the growth of online content. Very different nowadays.
It is.
Because you can come out of university or still be in high school and university and become a content creator because it is a viable kind of job, even though that I think a lot of people kind of still ruffle their noses around it because they don't necessarily see it as something very sustainable.
It is.
Whereas I think I'm lucky to have grown up in the period that I did because I was able to grow it sustainably, right?
Yeah, because I think I wouldn't say your generation, but when you were starting, everything was kicking in.
Correct.
Like YouTube was kicking in. The vlogs and the blogs. Actually, it started with the blogs and then the vlogs. So it was really good timing for you.
And also, I think what's important to note is no one did it as a job. It was everyone's blogs were passion projects.
Passion projects, right?
Because we didn't know you could earn from it. So you really did it for the love of doing it. Right?
So how did you turn that passion of being basically a hobbyist into like a business right now?
I mean, it wasn't something that I could tell you I could look 15 years into the future and decide that that's how it was going to be. Like that was impossible just because of the exponential growth of how media is consumed online. So it started off with a blog, and then that's when everyone was talking about kind of SEO. And it was just like, all right, how do you rank higher on search engines, on Yahoo, on Google, and stuff like that, with keywords. And then eventually people started advertising online with banners and stuff like that. And so you started realizing, okay, so there is potential in an online publishing media presence, and then there are advertisers who are now looking to get out on out of home advertising and TV advertising and looking at digital as a potential placement. Yes, very, very small percentage of their total marketing spend. But then as the medium evolved from written to pictures to videos on platforms like Vimeo and stuff first, and then YouTube.
Vimeo, I haven't heard that in a while.
Yeah, so that's where I started. I started on Vimeo and Facebook video also. And then you started doing that shift from kind of these very niche content repositories to social, right? And then when you had social, there was no longer that dynamic of I'm the publisher, you're the consumer. It was more of a conversation. And then, so when the switch happened to social, and that's when online personalities became more important, right? So I started seeing that shift, and I was like, okay, so versus purely informational content, you now have to start building up who you are as a person, and that being part of the package, and building that personal brand. And then you realize advertisers start paying you for that, for a combination of the content that you're putting out, but also of who you are
Your brand
as
itself.
an identity, right? And then I saw that happening, and then I realized, the question I always ask myself is, this was when I was in my 30s, I was like, what happens when I'm 60 and ugly, right? Or 60 and like lazy and I don't want to do this anymore.
Yeah.
What does that look like, right? So, and that's when I started looking at a shift to a platform, because I didn't want to be the end all be all, right? Obviously, when I started, it was all about trying to help people navigate weight loss. Because that was my first thing. It was the fat kid inside. And then that evolved to, okay, quick, fast recipes. And then after quick, fast recipes, it started branching out to Filipino food and exploring Filipino food and recipes. And then I hit a ceiling of how much can someone like me try to inform people about Filipino food if I'm the only person talking on camera. And so that's when we started branching out to, we started experimenting with travel videos and stuff like that, and eventually got to a point where like, okay, let's try videos where I'm not involved at all. I'm not on camera, I'm behind the camera. And those started flying. And so I started realizing, oh, okay, so documentary for us is our new medium. And really telling other people's stories. And that's kind of how we went from an individual to what you consider a KOL, to a content creator, and now to a media publisher.
But isn't that risky what you did there? Because
Very.
you're basically the brand itself.
Yeah.
And then transitioning it into company or basically a group of people, not you, not centered on you. So how was it? How did you transition to that? Or like, was it hard for you at first, or was that really what you wanted?
So ego-wise, it wasn't hard at all. Okay. Like I'd been wanting for a long time to try to step away from the camera. I also knew the volume requirement for content online, and I have a very hard time seeing myself in 30 videos a month. Right? It doesn't compute in my head. It's just way too much exposure. And obviously now we were making money online. It's just like, how many brands can I actually work with before someone calls me out and goes, dude, everything you do is branded, right? Like we don't know who you are anymore, right? There was just no longer any space in kind of how we were publishing to add in more work, add in more brands, yet the team was growing, so there was a disconnect of how much our overhead costs was and how much revenue we could potentially create, like our ceiling for revenue. And so it was a very easy decision to turn into a platform. It was a very scary decision to see whether or not it would fly.
So you would say that decision is mostly based on business?
No. So I mean, if you look at my trajectory, and everyone can look at my history of creating content online, it was never about me. From day one, it was never about who I am as a person. It was always about what kind of value or information I can bring to people, right? So I started off trying to help people lose weight, and then I was trying to get people to cook more at home, trying to make people realize that cooking at home was cheaper. And then it was about trying to expose more about Filipino food and my own culture, right? But it was never me. I was just the voice and the communicator.
It's nice that you're explaining it that way, because I think you're telling us that it's not about you. But how is it that people think that it's all about you?
Because we're a very celebrity-centric country, right? And so I've never been an artista. I've modeled maybe 1 or 2 times for some brand deals, but I've never been on TV. I've never gone on shows and danced and sing, because it's just not my thing. Some people do that. It's their thing. Great, right? I'm married to a celebrity as well. If it were about me, you would have seen Anne in all my videos, right? Because that would have been the fastest way for me to grow. Yeah. You would have seen me posting about Anne and my sister all the time. I never did, right? Anne has never been a component of my content. Yeah. And so it really was about the information that I was bringing to someone. And because that's who I am as a person, right? So the content I wanted to do is just very authentic to me. People think maybe it's centric to me just because I'm the one that you necessarily see on screen. But if you listen to what I'm saying, it's always trying to explain something to give a very specific opinion about a certain style of cooking or a certain recipe, right? And I think once we transitioned to feature, people didn't necessarily understand in the first year. Yeah. Okay. They're like, we don't get it, right? And then eventually, as once we started adding different content creators in the mix, or once we started doing more documentaries, people finally understood it. But what's funny online is that it's not like TV where there's this constant barrage of exposure to a certain person, right? So it's very easy for people to map out Anne's career. And it's very easy for people to be updated on Anne's career. It's very difficult for people to be updated on my career. So if I did one video in 2017 that, let's say, you saw, you didn't like, you'll stop watching me, right? So in your head today in 2024, Erwan is still creating cooking content that you don't like online, right? So a lot of people still don't know I run and own FEATR. A lot of people don't know how to pronounce FEATR. A lot of people don't know what kind of content we do on FEATR, right? So, and that's something that's always hard to come to terms with, because it's just like the haters you had in the past, you know for a fact that they would appreciate what you're doing today, but
are clouded
because they can't find it because they're biased to who you were back then, right? And you know, if someone didn't like my videos back then, I'm completely comfortable with that, but because that's the condition of the human nature, right? If I was the same person back in 2017, I'd hate myself, right? But you grow, you evolve.
You evolve,
Exactly.
You become better, that's why.
So I hope everyone that kind of had previous opinions about who I was and what I was doing, I hope they kind of look at what we're doing now and see the greater value of it, removing me out of the equation, right?
Because I think right now FEATR is still somewhat associated with you. With some people, they think.
Correct.
Yeah. So I guess, I kind of get your stigma with it. Like, if people didn't like you before, most likely they wouldn't watch your video now.
Exactly.
So when you started FEATR, did you have a vision of what you're doing now as that is basically the goal? Or you were just creating content and let's see what goes, or like what hits, what would the people want?
I was 100% determined. So anything you see today is exactly where I wanted to be a few years ago when I put together FEATR. I started looking at the media landscape, both in the Philippines, from written publishing to TV to digital media, and did the same thing in the US and in Europe and stuff like that. And I saw where things were going, and I was really frustrated. You know, why does the Philippines not have a Bon Appetit? Why does the Philippines not have an Eater? Kind of these huge, you know, conglomerate-funded media companies. We have big media companies in the Philippines, but I personally sometimes don't think that they fund the cultural aspect of things or the very informational aspect of things. And so I really wanted to build that. And we realized early on that the only way to do that in the Philippines was first to establish ourselves outside of our kitchen studio, since everyone knew what we were doing in terms of recipes and stuff, and really force the narrative of what we're doing outside. And then once those few documentaries really stuck to people and we got the responses that we wanted to, then we went all in.
I'm really interested in knowing your process of, highlighting these ingredients, because some of them are basically unknown, obscure, I would say. The only content creator I know who's has more intensive knowledge in terms of this is Localpedia.
Yeah.
How do you research for this? Or like, how do you know which ingredients to feature or highlight?
It's conversations. I mean, the whole team now has been exposed to the greater Philippines through all the travels that we used to do, right? So our out of studio content used to be me traveling around the country.
Yeah.
And it was mostly, I would call it a quote unquote selfish endeavor. It was mostly like showcasing how cool the Philippines can be, because that's what we wanted to do. We wanted to attract tourists and stuff. So it was surfing, hiking, things like that. And when we were doing these types of videos, obviously you're shooting for work, right? So you're coming in, you have 3 days to shoot, you're out, right? During those times, we would always have these conversations with local, and they were like, oh, you want to try this local kakanin or try this local ingredient that we're using and everything. And I found them so special, and I would always get so sad that we weren't able to stop and just do a full day on that particular ingredient and that particular process. So as we traveled the country, we realized there were so many hidden gems. So the first few documentaries that we did, focusing on ingredients or processes or artisans, were all based on online research. So we did as much online research as possible. We'd find the numbers, call the people, try to figure it out. And that did well, like for a certain time, but it was very expensive. Because then what would happen is we'd find this really cool ingredient. We started in the greater Metro Manila area and then the greater Luzon area. And then we realized we're like, okay, so we have to go to Pampanga to shoot one video, and then tomorrow we'll go to Batangas to shoot another video. And it was just too pricey production-wise. And then so I made the conscious decision of trying to attack provinces, because I realized obviously the Philippines is very separated in terms of provinces, and we're like, okay, why don't we take 3 more weeks to just research the full province. Let's find our important stories.
Yes.
We have 2-3 stories that we know not only will bring impact to the community we're featuring, impact to our audience for watching, but also just get us also the views, because that's the reality of things. Like, you need those 3 things to work together.
Those sticks too.
And then the 4th thing is we need to be really interested in it. So we would look for 2 or 3 of those, and then I would green light a province and say, okay, Pampanga is green lit. We have 2 stories. Let's find 6 more. And then so there we would call local experts, local chefs, and then eventually we're like, okay, let's just hire a researcher. So now we have we have 2 full-time story producers, researchers that we send to these different provinces. They spend 1 week to 2 weeks going around with motorcycles and stuff, trying to talk to people. And then eventually we're like, okay, now we have 7 stories. Let's organize the production team. And we realize a lot in the Philippines, like I always say, we have this fiesta mentality where we Filipinos in general are very generous.
Yeah.
And we love to cook for people and invite people in our homes. But a lot of the time, what we give our guests is what we think they like. And so if you're from Manila, I'm going to be cooking Tagalog food for you. Because the really cool thing I'm doing with kamote tops in the back, that's our everyday food. It's not special. So it's really about convincing people, hey, what you're doing there is super special, and I'm going to prove it to you by making a documentary about you. And they're like, me? Why would you do a documentary just about me, right? And we have some people who are just not naturally eloquent, which is totally fine. We tell them, okay, don't talk. Just tell us what you do. We'll write it down. We'll create a VO narrative from it, and we'll just follow you in your day-to-day life. And then they realize when they see these videos and it blows up on Facebook, they're like, oh, that's cool. People think what I'm doing is cool, especially because we shoot it in a way that's very tasteful and artistic and cinematic. So obviously these places, it doesn't necessarily look as romantic or dramatic when you're there, but you can really, we're not faking anything, but we're just showing the beauty where you can find it, right? Yeah. And when they see that, there's this overwhelming sense of pride. And that pride, makes things more sustainable for them.
Yes.
Because then they really fall in love with what they do, and then they really try to push it forward.
It's very interesting because that's what also John said, Locopedia said, that when he goes to different provinces, the people would always offer them something that is familiar to him, but not the ones that they're normally eating. Like example, their local vegetables, because for them it's mundane, it's just normal. Yeah. So they always think that that's nothing. But to be honest, it has to be highlighted so that it has this sense of beauty of being real.
Definitely. Yeah.
Out of all the documentaries you did, what is your most favorite? I'm pretty sure they're all special to you, but definitely there's this one, most likely there's this one documentary that you would say, oh, I'm really proud of this. I really, really love what we did in this documentary.
It was definitely the Salt series. So we did multiple episodes under the Salt series. The first one we did was Asin, and in Bohol. We didn't, obviously no one discovered it because they've been making it. Yeah. So we didn't discover it. We learned about it, and we started kind of researching it. And there was really not much about it online. And so that was when I was still kind of figuring out how do we shoot these provincial documentaries. So half of that documentary is actually produced by a local shooting team in Bohol. Oh. So we tapped 2 videographers in Bohol for the shots that we needed. And we kind of ran through them. We did all the story producing. We did all supplemental shots also. So it was a very strong collaboration between those 2 videographers and our team. And it was just a test because it would be way more expensive to fly in our people there, right? So we produced that, and it just went crazy viral. And I was like, why? And I really had to think about it. And I was like, because it's salt at the end of the day. And it's something that you can't cook without. Yet no one thinks about it, and everyone thinks salt is like this throwaway ingredient. Like if I gave you a pack of salt, you use it a bit, you would have no problem throwing that salt away.
Actually,
me too, right? Because it's a commodity, right? Salt is a commodity, table salt. And all of a sudden, you have this really beautiful, expensive, organic-looking salt that that people now see in a very elevated way. And then we started, running through the rabbit hole there, realized about the salt law that was passed that, made non-iodized salt illegal. And then we're like, okay, the Philippines has one of the longest coastlines in the world. Why aren't we producing more of this salt?
And why are we importing?
And yeah, why are we importing? And so there was, I think it was like 96% importation or something.
Yeah, that was crazy. When I saw that statistics
It's nuts.
too, I'm like,
It's completely nuts.
I know.
And it's just it's the perfect story about the Philippines. There's corruption in there. There's political motivation. There's intimidation tactics with local government units and the salt makers. And so it's just a really rich story matter. And so we almost felt like we were, we're documentarians, but also like we kind of felt like we were journalists when we were doing it, and people really got into it. But the thing that was the most important is once we did that Asin video, I forget which typhoon happened, but one of the typhoons happened, I think, a year after.
okay. Was that Yolanda? No, way back. That was way back, I think.
I'm not sure. Like,
But
there's so many typhoons in the
I
Philippines
know,
that are
there's
really
so many
bad.
different names.
It's hard to keep up, but it was one of the really bad ones that hit Bohol badly, and then their facility was completely broken. We were able to help them refund their facility. We never put a logo on it because that's not our style, but we were the ones that worked with them in putting that back up. So we realized kind of like the impact we could have, not through just revenue, but also the lady was telling us that they were backlogged with orders. They'd have never seen that many orders in their life. And so they had to hire people. Other people started creating Asin facilities in Albuquerque, Bohol, where it's from and everything. And we're like, whoa, this is cool. Like, I didn't know a video could do this, right? And then so we started going more into the deeper salt stories in Cavite, in Pangasinan, Zambales. Sorry, we didn't do Pangasinan. Zambales, Guimaras, Iloilo, the Tultul. And anytime we've done one of those videos, you went from, an older person saying, I'm the last artisan doing this, to now a thriving community of 11, 12, 15 salt makers all making it because the demand is so high. Yeah. And I'm not saying we're the ones that did that. We were just part of the catalyst. And now you see Tultul being used in restaurants. You see Asin Sibuok being used in restaurants. And
not just here, but globally.
Correct. And I think that's when we realize, wow, these documentaries really do have an impact. And I think that brings it back to what you call the Erwan effect. Like, I'd love to rebrand that to the FEATR effect. And it's just, you can tell each time we do a restaurant or something. That's why we're very careful with the stories we select, because it ends up being a recommendation, even if we don't want to call it that. But it ends up being something. I was talking to David Del Rosario from Sev in Siargao, and so he was saying, usually you reserve 1 day in advance, and he messaged me, he's like, and it's poor guy, he's quite tired already, and he goes, Erwan, it's 5 days now to reserve a seat since you guys put up the video. And I was like, I was like, it's a good issue, but I'm still very sorry. Like, I don't want to burn anyone out. So each time we do these features now, we understand that responsibility. So we talk to the people and we say, do you really want to be in these videos? Because this is what could potentially happen, and are you okay with that?
Yeah, I'm very curious with this. Why do you think that Asin Tibuok became like I would say global phenomenon? When John and I were talking, basically it was Asin Tibuok that kind of I would say blossom for his content. So why do you think Asin Tibuok is that
I think
big?
For the longest time, we've always looked at Western or imported as premium. And then obviously there was this whole nationalism surge in terms of the culture of the country, of people starting to look for more authentic, narratives, products, and items. And so, and this is worldwide as well, right? People started valuing organically made things made by artisans with heavy processes and stuff. And so I think Asin Tibuok just kind of fits into all those narratives really well. It's striking, it's beautiful. There's some fear in there of it disappearing. It takes a really, really long time to make. It's a good product. There's a strong, rich story behind it. And so I think that people started realizing, wow, these really simple, quote unquote, simple ingredients really have so much beauty to them. And I think that's what people are attracted to when they're looking for something with authenticity, right? And that's why we did a documentary about muscovado that popped off, because people are like, oh, muscovado is actually really cool. And then we did this thing about pacascas, right, which is palm sugar, which was also disappearing from Batangas and Isla Verde, which is extremely hard to buy. And people are like, oh, I grew up with that. I didn't realize it was special. And when you start realizing that, you're like, oh, this is probably one of the reasons why people don't think Filipino food culture is rich. It's because we don't know. That's it.
Yeah.
It's so provincial. Everything is so separated. The islands are so far from each other, and we're all so biased in our own knowledge and cuisine.
Yeah.
Right? I think John went through a little scandal online when he talked about puso, right? So you have puso in Cebu, which is
The difference of puso and Cebu
and puso in
forgot the place.
Capiz? Yes, in Rojas, right? Capiz, sorry. And the whole conversation was that's not puso, right? And that just shows you the issue with communication in the Philippines.
Yes.
It's like, why can't two things with the same name be completely different?
Yeah.
And why do you have to claim that one was before the other? Right?
Yes.
Don't live in your box. Understand that different words in different languages mean different things, and just be open to that. And I think once we start accepting all of that, then Filipino food culture will be very rich because we'll be all aware of each other, right?
What do you think is a major obstacle that's keeping our cuisine from achieving the same recognition as the other Asian cuisines?
So I think the biggest problem that we do is we compare ourselves to everyone else, right? Vietnam has so many fresh herbs. Thai has so many spices and chilies. China has so much variety and everything. Who cares about what other people are doing? Look at what you're doing and see how you can bring importance to it. So I think that's the first thing. The first problem is we compare ourselves. Second problem is the general lack of knowledge, right? I go to provinces all the time and people are like, oh, Erwan, a food expert. I'm like, nope, not a food expert, just a student. Because when I go to provinces, I'm like, what is that? What is that again? Like, I don't know the local terms, the local words, and I'm always discovering things, right? So there's a general lack of knowledge. And the third part is we're too biased. We think Filipino food should be cooked in this certain way. I think me being, Filipino French or French Filipino, I consider myself 100% more Filipino than I'm French because I've lived here. People don't know because they think I don't speak Tagalog. I was actually born and raised here. I was born here, lived here till I was 18, so I'm Filipino. And just like my nationality, people think because I don't speak Tagalog well, then it makes me less Filipino, which is dumb, right? I think that's a really dumb thing.
Especially you're born and raised there.
Yeah, exactly. So culturally, I think I'm very Filipino. And the same thing with our food, right? It's like, because it's not made 100% how your grandma did it, and then caveat, was your grandma actually correct in how she was making it? No one knows, right?
Different ways, different
just
eras.
because it's not made in that way, it's not that dish, right? And the problem with that is you become a very dish-centric nation. And the issue with a dish-centric nation is it boxes you in. It's like, I can only make machado this way. I can only make adobo this way, et cetera, et cetera. And you end up just presenting the same types of dishes and everything, right? But when you look at our cuisine, we're not dish-centric. We're technique-centric. Adobo is a technique, right? So you have to start looking, paksiw is a technique, right? So you start looking at these things as techniques, and you're like, okay, now we have a Filipino flavor profile. So if I want to make an adobo sauce and put it on lobster, I should be allowed to do it, right? And I shouldn't have a tita coming to me and saying, that's not adobo.
Yeah, that's not adobo. That's not wrong. That's wrong.
Exactly. And so I think every other cuisine in the world allows a lot of playfulness, a lot of... Japan is the perfect example. Most of the food that you see in Japan is not Japanese. Ramen is not Japanese. Like, you look at Japan in the, I don't know what century, but Japan was very much mostly fishermen. So the food cooked in Japan, very simple. But now they have this really rich culture because people are culturally open and extremely playful with the food. And I think for Filipino food, because we are heavily influenced by the whole world, let's use that as our strength. Like, those influences made us who we are today. So focus on that. And how do you build that up, right? You need to be playful. You need to be open-minded.
Sa episode na to, samahan nyo kaming explore ang kakaibang pahimagas, ano ba ito at saan nagmula ang inutak. Welcome to the search of the Philippine Islands. Tara na!
Learn more about these regional delicacies and delicious sweets here on Desserts of the Philippine Islands. Catch all the episodes on our YouTube channel, Bitesized.PH.
How would you describe the Filipino food scene right now?
I think it's great. I'm loving all the talent that's coming back home. I'm loving all the homegrown talent that's coming in. I think the food scene locally is way more cohesive nowadays. People are helping each other out. building each other up, except instead of kind of tearing each other down. And I love that there's this, resurgence into what Filipino food is, and really deep diving into our ingredients and how do we bring them out, how do we communicate it. The storytelling of Filipino food is there, both from the really high end to kind of your everyday kind of food and eateries. I think people are becoming more proud of being Filipino, and that's translating through the dishes that were being presented and served.
Congratulations on your James Beard Award.
Thank you.
And I'm going to say that because, my next question is this one. So in your James Beard Award speech, you mentioned tons of Filipino have said Filipino food is the next big thing.
Correct.
And I'm obsessed with trying to figure out how to make it just the big thing. So in terms of that, what do you think is hindering us from becoming that big thing?
I mean, I think it's everything that we talked about, right? It's this general acceptance. And I mean, let's extrapolate. Let's not talk just about food. Let's talk about identity and nationalism. There's so many conversations online about decolonizing our way of thinking and decolonizing food and everything like that. And I always ask these people, I'm like, okay, what's a Filipino? Like, where in the timeline of our history, when do you start defining the Filipino? Mm-hmm. We have close to no written history about the Philippines pre-1521, when the Spanish started coming. Yeah. Before 1521, I don't know exactly when the Philippines was dubbed,
Spanish colony.
The Philippines,
right?
The Philippines, the name itself. But before that, we weren't even a country. Mm-hmm. We were a group of tribes, chieftains, provinces. Mm-hmm. Some part of it was Borneo. Some part of it was part of what you now kind of see as Malaysia and everything like that. And some of these provinces, did interact. Some of these mini countries did interact. It's like, if you look at France back in the day, France wasn't France. It was Gaulois. At one point, it was Roman. That's how history works.
Yes.
It evolves. It's not set in time. So when people say decolonize, who you are as a Filipino, it strips away everything that also makes us Filipino.
Exactly.
I think the Filipino is a mix of all these pre-colonial tribes and countries, but also all the modern influences of it. And I think people need to accept that, because you don't want to box in the culture. Something as, which I'm not necessarily a huge fan of, like I'll eat it, like sweet spaghetti. Mm-hmm. It's comforting for me. It's not something I crave for, but it's something that's comforting for me. For me, that's just as important as chula itum from the Tausugs, right? And that's part of our culture, and you need to learn how to embrace that. And I think once we learn how to embrace that about what Filipino is and what can be presented as Filipino food, I think we'll be able to communicate it more to everyone else around the world.
By understanding our own cuisine is basically, that's our way of letting other people know our cuisine.
Correct.
Because I think abroad, in just my observation, they're not familiar too much with Filipino. The only thing they know is about our food is just lumpia, adobo, and sinigang. Basically, those are the three things. That when you ask like a foreigner, when you ask them what Filipino food would you like to try, those are normally the things that they would say.
Correct. And there's a reason behind that. It's like I said, it's a general lack of knowledge, which is not a bad thing. Mm-hmm. Like, we're not all super smart. Like, I'm not smart. It's just I like learning, right? But that general lack of knowledge, like when a lot of people tend to shit on Filipino Americans. Mm-hmm. Because the food that they know is bulalo, lumpia, and everything. But you have to understand, where did they learn that food? It's from their parents, who learned that from their parents. And if in your lineage you don't have a chef, then of course you're gonna operate with a very limited set of dishes, right? So if you look at most of the food that's coming out of the U.S., and I think they're being really creative out there, most of them are based on what they grew up eating, and that's how we grew up eating, right? So you can't and the Filipino American culture is an evolution, or is a different culture of the Filipinos that are here, but you just have to generally accept that as well, because there are two things that can live simultaneously. And if the chefs out there want to learn more about our food, great, then they come here to the Philippines, they start studying more, and then they kind of expand that knowledge base of what Filipino food is, right?
You said a while ago that people tend to choose sides or be biased on their side, on their dishes. Like example with puso in Cebu, they're basically saying that that's their cuisine. Why do you think that this is a situation in the Philippines? We tend to be biased on certain parts, and we tend to gravitate towards traditional more than evolving our cuisine.
I think it's based on not wanting to be wrong, I think that's a general human condition. Once you're called out on something, you tend to react and you tend to go in the defensive. If that person has the historic reference, context, and knowledge to stand by what they're saying, I'm happy, right? But if you don't, maybe have an open mind to kind of think about it a bit more. And I think also people tend to look down on our food in general. Filipinos in general as well. We tend to look down on food. I talk to carinderias all the time, and I asked them, I'm like, why aren't you serving this hot? Your food is so good. It'd be amazing if it was hot, like next level. Why don't you care about that? Oh, because people are buying it and eating it. I'm like, because I used to run operations in restaurants, so I understand kind of how things, should be prepared. And I tell them, if you just work on this 1 hour earlier, or you start cooking these batches at different times, you're going to be way busier, because people are going to be like, not only do you have really good carinderia food, but you have really hot carinderia food.
Yes.
And we all technically enjoy eating hot food. It's just that we'll also eat cold food, right? So it's just to stop looking down on our food and stop simplifying it. It can be fantastic if you give it the right care. I get shit online all the time when I, quote unquote, overcomplicate a Filipino food. And people call me out for overcomplicating Filipino food when I make it completely from scratch. And it's just like, I have nothing against Knorr, Magic Syrup, and all those brands. I'll work with it. I even cook with it at home.
Yeah.
But making something from scratch is overcomplicating it. Maybe that person has to change their perspective, right? Because when you make it from scratch, you can highlight the flavors that you want, the textures that you want, and little things like that.
There's no shortcut in everything.
And all of a sudden, you have two dishes that are the same, made with very similar ingredients, but one is just better because you have that thought process, right? And it's the same thing as when you're cooking with measurements and without measurements. If you're cooking in a controlled state, you can always highlight certain things more.
Exactly.
So you can make a dish better. Like, I can cook a dish today, and I promise you, if I cook it 15 more times this week, the 15th time will be way better than the first. Is because you keep adjusting and keep making differences, right? So I think we need to look at our food like that. Not just, let's just put everything on pot and it'll be great. It'll be great. It'll be good.
Yeah.
But it could be better.
Could
right?
be better, yeah.
Yeah.
So if you put more care to it, basically.
Correct.
That's about
And that's why everyone, their moms are the best.
Yeah.
It's because your mom put care in their food.
Exactly.
Simple as that. The love goes in.
It's all about the love and the care.
Exactly.
What's your favorite comfort food?
I eat a lot of soups. Yeah, so binakol is
binakol.
one of my top.
That is one of the most out of the bat question you could actually give. Like, Erwan likes binakol.
It's because
Like,
it's sweet.
I was expecting you would give maybe a French dish.
No.
But you gave me binakol. Like, that's so random. Binakol.
Soup and stews are my two comfort foods. And I love beans also, but Filipino food, you don't necessarily think beans, but we do have a lot of bean dishes up north. But yeah, binakol just has that comfort. I think when I think comfort, I think soups, and I think putting copious amounts of rice into that soup, and then binakol just has those strands of meaty coconut in there, and that's just really, really satisfying.
I prefer that more than tinola. Sorry,
100%. 100%.
But if binakol is way better than
Day and
tinola.
night, yeah.
What was everyday food like growing up in a French Pinoy household?
It was mostly Filipino, most of the time. We were lucky to have a cook at home, so we had really good Filipino food growing up. But because obviously my dad is French, then there was a lot of requests for more international cuisines and dishes. And so, I don't hide behind this. I had a very privileged upbringing, which I'm grateful to my parents for. And it just exposed me to lots of different dishes and lots of different cuisines. So we ran the gamut, anything from Thai, Vietnamese, Chinese, Filipino, French, all that was being cooked.
So at a young age, you were basically exposed to different cuisines already?
All the time, yeah. And we were very lucky to be able to travel a lot when we were kids also. So that gave us kind of that global perspective, which I think helps.
What ignited your passion for food then?
I like
Is there a certain dish?
Yeah, it was salpicao. I was
Salpicao?
8. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I was 8 years old. I was home alone. I was left home alone, and I remember the previous day, my older sister Vanessa had a conversation with her friend, also called Vanessa. The two Vanessas were talking about salpicao and how to make salpicao. And obviously I've had salpicao tons of times before. And I was left at home, and I was starting to get hungry, and I looked in the fridge. There was crusty, overcooked, leftover white rice, and there was a steak there that was defrosted, and I was like, okay, let's just try cooking this. And I remember cooking, it was so much fun because I remembered them talking about a loose recipe, like what are the ingredients and stuff like that. And then I made it myself and realized, back then I thought it was pretty good. And I realized, whoa, you can actually cook just with references on memories and flavor profiles and things that you taste. And I love that because it became very instinctive, right? It's based on instinct. That's it. Maybe the meat wasn't seared properly, probably that's thing. And I realized, wow, you can actually build technique to kind of do these things. And I just found it really fun. Like, I'm someone who, I don't deep dive into things. I mean, now I do, obviously, with work, but I never used to. I'm not that one person that'll go all in one thing. I like doing multiple things at the same time. That's why I think production works for me, because you get to do multiple things at the same time. And I love being able to do those things through instinct. Like what feels right, and that's how I get really into projects. And so making that self-pical, realizing that you can make it based on memory was a revelation to me. And then after that, it just really got into cooking.
So basically, it was the salpicao was a dish that literally ignited your passion for food.
That was the catalyst. And then I told my mom I was into cooking, and then every time we had a family gathering, she's like, "You like to cook? You do it." I think it was easier for her. It was like child labor.
Smart.
But what she
Smart
didn't realize is I didn't like cooking big dishes. Like at 10 or 11, I was cooking, like.
So at a very young age, you started cooking.
Yeah, and I was cooking like ridiculous 12-course meals, like plated 12-course meals.
Wow.
And I'd force my mom, her friends, to eat. So like I remember one Christmas there was 20 people, and I was like maybe 14, and I did a 16-course meal. And by the 5th course, it was way too much food already. People were just like, fuck, there's more. So there was no pacing. There was no kind of understanding of portioning or anything like that. But I just really enjoyed doing it. And my parents were cool enough to kind of let me do it.
Did you go to culinary school? Or
No.
You did, I heard, well, there were rumors that you did go to culinary school.
Secretly? No, never. So when I was 16, I actually worked at the Dusitani for a couple months in their cold kitchen, in their Japanese kitchen. Because I was trying to decide what I wanted to do with my life. And I was that guy in high school. I drank a lot, I partied quite a bit. I was that guy you would call at 2 a.m. and say, "Hey, Erwan, I'm hungry. I'm sick of North Park. Can we come over?" And they would come over to my house at 2 a.m. and I would cook something. It was usually corned beef, but I would cook something for them. I loved cooking for people. And then so after high school, I had the decision either go into business, and I also got accepted into a French culinary school called Grégoire Ferrandi in Paris. And
Sorry,
then
again?
Grégoire Ferrandi. And then at that fork, like I really had to think, and I was like, do I really see myself cooking in a kitchen for the rest of my life? And then I realized that's not what I wanted to do. Like I enjoyed, like I said, I don't like to deep dive into things. Yes. I enjoy the overall aspects of operations, of restaurants, of hotels and stuff like that, that guest experience. And I knew if I was just in a kitchen cooking, I would probably not be able to do that. So I decided to go into business.
So you dabbled with different contents throughout the year. So you started with health, food, and then travel. When did you really tell yourself, you know what, I'm going all in on this food thing?
So, you know how a lot of people kind of grow up with heroes? I didn't have any of those. Like, not that I said, not that I'm saying I haven't been inspired by people, but I get inspired by things that are not in the industry that I am in, right? So I love fiction writing. I love, like, Tolkien, super fan here. The books, just how he kind of explains and describes things. So those are the types of things that kind of influence my work. The world building of fantasy is fantastic. And so, like, it was a conscious decision when I realized, okay, food, travel, those are all great. Food is just something that is just ever present in people's mind, culture. And I mean, the documentaries that we do specifically, I always had a chip on my shoulder because I don't speak Tagalog well. And I wanted to not prove, but show people that you can be Filipino in different ways. Like, it doesn't have to just be language. And I have a daughter now who's 4. It's like, I know a lot of people kind of give me shit for it, but it's a lot to ask a kid to talk 4 languages.
Actually.
Like, learn 4 languages. Great. And, I always tell people who criticize me on my language, I tell them, where are your parents from? Oh, I'm, Bicol and Ilocano. Do you speak Bicolano and Ilocano? No. You're like, you speak Tagalog? Yeah. Be like, well, put yourself in my shoes. It's kind of the same thing. Why don't you speak Bicolano and Ilocano? Because you weren't exposed to it, right? You grew up speaking English and Tagalog. I just happened to grow up speaking English, French, and Spanish when I was a kid. Like, those are my languages, right? So I just wanted to show people that language isn't the only thing that can define you as part of a culture. And food, for me, was that second thing. When I think of Filipinos, you think of all these islands with all these different languages and dialects, but you also think about all these islands and different foods. So for me, that was my language to try to showcase that you can be Filipino through the knowledge and the love that you have for your country. And then, so it started off with that passion, and then it got fueled more by the impact you could create. But not only that, like, I love the idea of gastro diplomacy. I do think if the Philippines has more exposure internationally, if we can get the right tourists to come here, if the government can get their act together and cater to those tourists logistically and sustainably, like, it can help the country. Like, tourism can help the country a lot. And I think food tourism is super key to the Philippines, because you see so many videos online of people coming to the Philippines and say, the Philippines, great, white beaches, but the food is terrible. And so I want to help people try to find what are the good places, but only that, but also showcase the Filipinos. Hey, if you do things slightly differently, you could actually create something really beautiful with the food, and people will love it, right?
Yeah.
I mean, Thailand was the best at doing that, right?
Actually,
I don't know if you know.
that,
So everyone knows about Pad Thai, right? And how they use that to kind of explode Thai culture. What a lot of people don't know is in all major Thai tourism destinations, there was a government program to only specifically grow a certain species of coconut in those areas, so that wherever tourists are, they have the sweetest coconuts, right?
Oh, really?
You ask any coconut farmer here, what species coconut do you have? Oh, it's just coconuts. That lack of specificity makes a huge difference, right? And so Thailand did that. And so that's why we also focus on ingredients, because I want people to understand you need to be specific in what you're doing, right? And that's how you build value.
That is great.
Yeah.
I mean, I think also Thailand is good with food tourism. I think they're mainly focusing their tourism on food.
Around food, correct, yeah.
So they're basically selling Thailand as like this one big area of basically a food park. Kind
Exactly.
of like a food bazaar for great food, right?
Hi, I'm Inka Bagnayet.
I'm Abby Marquez.
Hi, this is Julie.
Hi, this is Raver.
I'm Radson Flores.
Hi, I'm Makoy Dubs, and this is 8 List Slam Book.
8 List Slam Book.
8 List Slam Book.
8 List Slam Book.
8 Lists Slam Book.
Get to know more about your favorite celebrities and personalities. Head on to 8list.ph YouTube channel and tune in to Slambook.
But then, I mean, like, so you look at coconut is an amazing example. The Philippines has so many coconuts, right?
We're abundant of that.
We're abundant. You go to the Naga City Public Market, you go there, any of the coconut, you know how they make gata in the markets? You talk to any of those guys. For me, there's coconut water, there's coconut milk, there's coconut cream.
Yes.
I never realized there's a huge spectrum in between.
Really?
Right?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, let's talk about that.
So they can give you coconut creams and milks at different textures and at different presses. I think it's like 5 stages.
Okay.
Right? So imagine how specific that is and how cool that is.
That is
right?
cool.
Because you can be like, okay, this coconut milk, I can use it for shakes. This one for kinilao. This one for cooking. This one for finishing. This one for stewing, whatever. Imagine if those guys could tell you what the species of that coconut is. Like, how much better that would be.
That's wild.
So already they're very specific.
That's mind-blowing
Yeah,
stuff.
they're very specific in terms of the process.
Okay.
Imagine if they were specific in terms of the species of coconut. Then what you can do is like, okay, I'm from Bicol. I want to build a business. I'm going to can coconut cream that's in the 3rd stage of press with the name of the species of the coconut there, exactly what barangay it's from. I can sell that now much higher than regular coconut cream because there's specificity to it.
Exactly.
And that's one thing we're not good at. And that's one thing I hope we get good at, right? It's like when we did our ube documentary, you think ube is ube, right? You don't realize that ube has, I think, hundreds of varieties, right? And we went to one of the research institutes in Benguet, and they all have different things. Some are sweeter, some are more purple, some are starchier, et cetera, et cetera. And the most high value is kinampay, right? I think kinampay ube. But it's not necessarily sold at a higher value than all the other ubes. So the farmers are like, screw it, I'm not going to do this anymore.
Exactly.
Right? Why would I break my back doing this one thing if I can't sell it for higher?
If it's all the same
Correct.
prices, right?
But if the specificity is there, then that farmer has a stronger, sustainable future, right?
That's nice. Okay, I'm going back again to our talk with John because whatever he's saying right now, that's also the thing that he's saying. That sometimes farmers are discouraged of doing or basically farming this type of crop because it's not profitable for them.
Correct. And I think we tend to romanticize farming a lot. It's hard work.
It is hard work.
Right? And it's like, oh, but farmers in the Philippines are getting older, or why is this the last generation? Why doesn't your kid want to become a farmer too? Because it's hard work. And because the kid probably is looking at it and is like, why would I grow onions if you're just going to always pay the same price for onions, right?
Exactly.
And like, usually generations need to evolve what their parents are doing, right? So I think specificity could fix that.
Growing up and being exposed early on to French and Filipino cuisines, are there any similarities?
Traditional French food is very saucy, very heavy, very heavy-handed in terms of butter and stuff like that. So there are some similarities in terms of the stews that we have, some of the techniques. French food is not sour at all, so that's kind of like one of the biggest departures that we have. But in terms of that comforting bowl of food served with starch, it's very similar in France. Yeah.
So when they do their beef bourguignon, they also serve it with basically
With usually potatoes
and
yeah,
everything.
rice not so much, but usually potatoes. Yeah.
Do you have any favorite French Pinoy fusion food that either you do or you've tried before?
That I've made.
Yeah.
So my mom's a great cook. My dad only taught me one dish. It's from where he's from. So he's from Brittany, which is the west coast arm of France. That's where Quignemon was born. That's where crepes were born. So that comes from that region. Cider, crepes, and Quignemon. And so he taught me this dish because they're all fishermen there. It's called homard à l'armoricaine. Armoricaine is Armor, la Côte d'Armor is a coast that's there. Okay. They're huge into shellfish. And so it's a lobster and usually a lobster dish with kind of like a fumé, which is like a fish broth. And it's delicious. It's like a stewy lobster, thick tomato-ish, rich sauce. I've made that with palapa because I like fairly hot food. And so
wait, that dish is kind of like a bouillabaisse, would you say?
Ish, yeah, close,
Yeah.
close. In terms of texture, very close. Just chunkier.
Chunkier.
Yeah, and one seafood, no fish
just
or
one
anything like
seafood,
that.
okay.
Yeah. And so I made that with palapa. I mean, I wouldn't consider it fusion because I see palapa more as a spice condiment versus taking two dishes and putting them together. This was just adding a Filipino touch to a very French dish. If I had a Filipino high-end restaurant, I would have no problems putting that on the menu because I feel like that's what we should be doing, right? Yeah. We can bring Filipino food culture to other dishes, but we can also bring other dishes into our culture and mix mash it, right?
Yeah, because I think that's
sense.
one of our problems too, right? Like we mentioned a while ago, we try to gatekeep some of our dishes.
Yeah,
It has to be this way only, and
Correct.
that's the only way that we can do it.
And palapa is so good. And so I made that. That worked really well. I've done my chicken afritada closer to a French chicken stew. So I add butter to my frittata, and I add honey to my frittata. If you haven't tried it, so
Honey
good.
and frittata.
Just try it, yeah.
Okay.
Finish with butter. It'll just give it that more like oily sheen on your lips.
Yeah.
And that honey just brings a nice caramel flavor
That
to
sounds
it, which
good.
is really good.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna
I got shit for doing that. And they're like, my mom doesn't do that. I'm like, I don't care. Try it. If you like it, great. If you don't, then don't do it again.
As a frequent traveler, which international cuisine for you stands out the most?
That's a tough one. I think Japan is an easy answer, just because not only do you get exposed to lots of traditional, quote unquote, traditional foods, but you also have the best of the world there. Some of the best Italian chefs are in Japan. Some of the best French chefs are in Japan. So you really get a microcosm, a global microcosm of food that's done with respect and really well.
Japan, great choice. Haven't been to Japan. Hopefully we get to Japan. Hopefully we guys go to Japan. Soon. Okay. Now let's talk about the story behind FEATR. I know we basically run through it a while ago, but what's the story behind the name of Feature? Why Feature?
So FEATR is an acronym, Food Encounters and Travel. It's also a short style that I used to use in high school. When I would write the word featuring, I would just write FEATR. And then I would put an apostrophe for the ing. Like I don't know how people take notes now in school, but that's how we used to take notes. Like you kind of contract words to be able to write quickly when someone was giving a lecture. So that's the name behind it. So it was kind of to showcase everything that we're trying to do under the brand, and also I like brand names that become verbs. And so like when someone says, "Oh, I got featured," or when I write an email to someone, we would love to feature you. Instead of writing the whole word feature, I write the brand name feature. So I think that was clever. I don't think a lot of people understand that. I mean, that's why we put the actual pronunciation on the pronunciation on there. I also didn't realize that people would call it feeder. I'm just like, it doesn't really sound great.
A lot of people call it feeder.
Everyone.
It's like an OnlyFans. It's like an OnlyFans name.
I was like, not into feet, but cool. I think it's also because there's the platform Eater.
Okay.
Right? So they think it's that, yeah. But I think slowly people are calling it feature.
Okay, so guys, it's feature. Okay, so it's not feature. Now with such a wider recognition globally and locally, do you ever feel a sense of pressure when producing your content?
I mean, pressure two ways. There's the public pressure, and then there's the internal pressure. The public pressure, I don't feel it as much. We just feel the responsibility that we have. It's not about getting bigger, doing more things or anything like that. It's about kind of always being responsible with the type of content that we put out to make sure that we minimize mistakes, that, everyone makes mistakes.
Yeah.
Make sure we minimize mistakes, make sure we do our research properly, we present things fairly and all that. So there's that responsibility now that we carry to make sure that everything we do is done at the best that we can do it at that time. Internal pressure, a lot, because online media publishing is a very fickle business. It's one that's constantly moving, constantly evolving. Yeah. We do have a team of 32 people, so Feature is separated into the Fat Kid Inside Studios, and Fat Kid Inside Studios is basically the production arm. So all the production stuff is done under the Fat Kid Inside Studios, and Feature is just kind of a brand name that's there for publishing. And so we have a full staff of 32 people. We're one of the few media companies that carries a full-time production staff. So all our lights, all our cameras, and we have some really high-spec stuff. All that's in-house, cinematographers, DOPs, videographers, audio, all that's in-house, producers, etc. So we have a team of 32 that obviously needs to be fed every month, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's just that pressure of making sure that we're building sustainable revenue services. So now we do all the content for Maggie. We do most of the content for Nestle Cream as well. And so those kind of like steady cash flows have helped take some of that pressure off in terms of making sure we're doing something consistent. Because Feature, the publishing, doesn't work without Fat Kid Inside Studios, the production arm. If Fat Kid Inside Studios started losing clients in terms of the services that we provide for other content publishing, our content publishing for our clients, if we started losing that, then we'd have to downsize what we do on Feature, which keeps me up at night. So I'm always thinking about how do we make sure this is sustainable, and I'm always looking ahead as to what else can we do. It's probably in your questions there, but like natural next steps for us is, I mean, like I said, I'm not personally on the camera as much nowadays, so I get to kind of really think about the type of content that we're creating, the type of content that I particularly want to make also. And so we're looking at, limited series, streaming, fast platforms. How do we start tackling that? Like, how do we get our message out about Filipino food to a wider audience?
There was this one podcast that you did, and you said that one of your failures was being in the restaurant business, right? So I'd like to ask, based on that failures, what did you learn?
So, I mean, that's twofold, right? It's one, I was becoming a public figure, and then two, restaurant business. For some reason, people love shitting on people's failures when you're a public figure, right? Because people love the scandals and stuff like that. And so already closing a restaurant is very difficult thing because technically you're letting go 40 people each time you put up and close down a restaurant. And like while we were closing these down, people were automatically saying, oh, Erwan's a shit cook, he's a failure, he's closing all these restaurants. And this is like public information. So your failures are broadcasted, which I honestly don't think is very fair. Till this day, I don't think that's fair that people do that, right? And so, yeah, that was my biggest failure because I was in my 20s. I made some mistakes. I moved too fast. I ended up reinvesting all the money I made in Russia because they paid me well in Russia and losing all that money. And it was a failure in a sense that I just didn't take my time with it and it wasn't really calculated. I do think some of those concepts that we opened back then, if we were to reopen it now, they would actually do well. But yeah, I didn't take the time to plan, to strategize, to do it properly. And that's completely on me, right? But when I call it my biggest failure, it's because I also didn't understand the ecosystem we were in. And in restaurants, I eat in so many restaurants, but you'll never see me doing a restaurant review online. Because it's like anything. I can go to your job today and you're fantastic, and I'll come to your job tomorrow and you're shit.
Yeah.
Like, right, it happens to everyone. Everyone has a bad day. And so with restaurants, the problem is people feel entitled to broadcasting those opinions. And they don't know how harmful or hurtful those opinions can be online in terms of making someone decide whether or not I'm going to eat in that restaurant tonight. So I always tell diners and people who like to talk, shit about food and stuff, if you have a problem with your food, it happens, but just talk to someone there. You don't need to chase clout and post a bad review online or something like that. Even if you're really angry. If you're really angry, then really just talk to the manager.
Yeah.
I think that's the best way forward. But yeah, biggest failure, but coming out of Russia, one of my plans was I really wanted to get an MBA for some reason because I thought I was going to be in the corporate world forever. Okay. Everything I lost in my restaurants was the equivalent of like an Ivy League MBA education. So I was like, all right, that's my MBA. Like I'm not gonna.
The whole experience.
That whole experience is the MBA, yeah, and it was like 6 years of my life. So it really taught me so much. But I think the biggest learning I had from it was understanding how to compartmentalize things, making sure that if something bad is happening in this particular area of your life or in this particular restaurant, don't let it affect everything else, because that's how depression starts. And the other one is to not react to anything. And so now those are two lessons that I try to tell my team about. Like if there's, because we're a very open feedback office. If I have a problem with you and the work that you're doing today, very calmly, I'll say, hey, you're not doing great today. And I want that to be received with openness versus defensiveness. So I always tell people, learning how not to react is a superpower. Because once you don't react to things, instead of thinking about the problem, you automatically start thinking about the solution. It's just like, okay, I'm not going to react. Maybe you're right. Maybe I'll defend myself because maybe you're wrong in some things. But let's do this, so let's make it better, right?
With the social media constantly evolving, how do you stay ahead of the ever-changing trends?
I think it's really important to, look at trends, look at what's happening. I always look at the macro, like a macro perspective on the industry as a whole. I don't like to live in a box. So I like to expose myself in what's happening in business and world politics and international media and publishing and all these things, just to understand where we're heading, just so that we have a guide going forward. But I always think it's more important to kind of just solidify what you're doing and who you are. I mean, this is a note to all the new content creators out there, right? Now there's a fast track. There wasn't that fast track anymore. The benefit that we had 12, like me particularly, we had 12 years to figure things out. And those 12 years fine-tuned our voice, our approach, our treatment without the pressure of this is a job, right? It was a slow burn. Whereas nowadays, it's like you need to go viral, you need to figure this out, you need to make this a job right now. And so I always tell content creators first to take that pressure off yourself. It is always really important to build experience elsewhere. Like I wasn't always doing what I'm doing, right? I worked in restaurants, I owned restaurants, I worked in operations, I worked corporate. I've gone through that aspect and that structure and reporting and all that. And I think that really helped build the business the way we have it today. So aside from just looking ahead, it's also looking within, fixing those processes, that structure, and then just defining who you are as a brand and your voice as a content creator.
In this upcoming year, 2025, what changes or trends do you see happening or anticipating in the food trends, in the food world?
I don't think we're going to see much change. I think we're very much now everyone's a food content creator. Like there's so much food content online. If you are based in the Philippines, I think it's really important to start looking within your own culture, right? I always say I feel bad for Americans and Australians. They don't really have much to. So when you see look at American and Australian content creators, their food's all over the place.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
They're cooking French things, Japanese things, Chinese things, American food and stuff like that. We have the opportunity to really delve into our culture and really uplift that culture, right? And put it on the world stage. So I do think there is going to be a trend, because there's such a flood of food content online, for people to kind of start looking more within and start thinking, instead of tanghulu, let's do something that speaks to me as a person and that I can add a story to. We're seeing a lot of like cinematic, beautiful food videos and stuff like that. And you know what's really important, interesting. I always tell people, nothing you see is new, right? When you see a content creator making these like stunts with food, commercials have been doing that for 50 years, right? It's just everything's a wheel, everything comes back. So it's just figuring out what your treatment is, but more importantly, what ties all that together is kind of the story you want to put forward. More and more, people will start being very selective. I think people now are very selective with who they follow and what they like. Right.
Watch,
so I think going into 2025, 2026, I think that value is going to be way more important than it is today. Right. Today, it's still mostly about what's trending, what can go viral, what music I can use to make it go viral and everything like that. And that's fine. Like I do that from time to time. Like it's fun to do, but you need to be known for something.
You said that there are a lot of food content creators now, especially here in the Philippines. Do you think it's a bad thing or a good thing for the content world in general?
I think it's fantastic. I think the more people join in, the better, because then just the narrative grows, right? Especially when it comes to highlighting Filipino food, that just becomes a bigger conversation. So I think it's definitely a good thing to see people come and jump into it. I still tell people, don't do it as a job, right? Like do something else, and then make this your passion, your hobby. Because if you do it as a job right away, you're put into these positions where you might have to start doing things that you don't want to do because you need to make ends meet, right? Like when we started content, when I would do a branded post, I would freak out. I'd be like, shit, people are going to think I'm selling out. Now there's no such thing, because everyone has to sell out if they want to do this. You're not selling out. Everyone has to do some branded projects.
For it to become sustainable.
But super important, you need the experience and you need to have built the platform for the ability for you to say no.
Yes.
If you're saying yes to everything, that brand, your own brand, will dilute very quickly, right? You need to be in a position...
That's selling out, basically.
That's selling out. You need to be in a position where you have stable enough revenue that you can say, okay, this particular brand that wants to work with me and wants to do this, not going to fly with my audience, so I'm going to say no, right? That's really, really important.
So based from that statement, you've said no to a lot of brands, right?
I have a reputation of saying no.
Saying no to different brands.
But because it wasn't my job. When I started doing content, I was working in operations in Russia. And then I moved to the Philippines. I worked for a corporation here. I was doing content. At one point, I set up about 10 restaurants. I was doing content on the side. All of that was on the side. Only in 2016 that I started taking it seriously, but I still wasn't all in. I was all in maybe 2018. 2019 was a great year, and then 2020 happened. You're like, shit, we were in a roll.
I know.
But what happened, right? So, yeah, I think that's important to kind of be able to evolve slowly that way.
Yeah, so you basically respect the process of getting in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like you said, it's already fast track. A lot of content creators are coming out of nowhere and just getting... I feel like they're being pressured to basically replicate the success that they had from one video or two videos.
Correct.
Which constantly puts pressure on them.
Yeah, and I think for me, obviously I'd be lying to you if I don't look at numbers, if I don't look at numbers from other people and everything like that. talked to me maybe 6 years ago, then maybe I'd get slightly insecure. Be like, why does that person have higher views than I do or anything like that? But then what we realize is sustaining that engagement and growing that audience are two metrics that are way more important than how many views one video gets. And brands are smart. Brands, they know this campaign is a viral campaign, so we'll allocate it to these KOLs. But this campaign is a long-term campaign where we want to build value. Then they'll give that to someone else. So that the more you grow that ecosystem, the better it is, because for the brands themselves and the businesses, they have options, right? Versus always using the same people over and over again.
Speaking of business, do you see yourself as a competitor to other KOLs or influencers or other media? Or do you see it's more of like an ecosystem where everyone could thrive together?
I think I don't see any, I came up in the restaurant world in kind of like the new school era, where restaurants didn't see each other as competition. We saw each other as, hey, if we take over this one block with really cool concepts, we're going to drive more people to that block. That's how Poblacion happened, right? It's not people competing with each other, it's people complementing each other. And that's how I see the content world as well. And that's why I always really advocate to all content creators out there, if you're going to do this for work, be professional. You get an email, answer it within 1 or 2 days. If you want to do branded projects, freaking get an OR, right? You need to be set up properly, because if you don't, it looks bad on the whole industry as a whole. And then agencies, they don't necessarily know you very well, right? So when they approach you, they'll approach you like everyone else. So we've always been trying to professionalize the content creator world, and it's happening now, which is great. But yeah, I see it as the more the ecosystem grows, the more options brands will have, the more specific campaigns will become, the better it is for everyone. Yeah.
What upcoming content can we expect from FEATR?
When I think of FEATR, I think it's been around forever. It hasn't. It basically was set up 2021, still kind of like pandemic-y vibes there. So still, some of our videos had masks in it. We weren't able to shoot it with the right amount of people in our teams that we wanted to. So I really feel like FEATR has really come into its own. Even though we launched in 2021, we figured shit out in 2022. 2023, we really solidified our voice and who we wanted to be as a brand. 2024 was fantastic in terms of just continuing that. So I think I'm not going to put pressure on myself or the team saying, hey, 2025, 2026, 2020, these are the goals, we need to do this. Yeah. No, I think we're now in the flow of things. We figured out what works for us. We figured out what our audience is like, and we figured out where we can bring the most impact into what we're trying to do. So if I could replicate 2024, I would, and then just copy paste in 2025 and 2026, and then let's look at other things. In terms of how the brand grows eventually, we're looking at cookbooks now that we want to try to self-publish, and like I was saying a while ago, we really want to try to tackle streaming and limited series for larger platforms. We're just figuring out if you were Netflix US, you probably wouldn't buy a whole series about Filipino food, but you might buy a full-length documentary about Filipino food. So we're kind of just figuring out those treatments, seeing where that goes. Yeah.
Would you be focusing on a certain platform or a certain style of content?
From the very beginning, if you look at my content, except for the Phantom Hands and the Only Hands stuff I used to do, the reason why, as a content creator, I grew as not just a one-man team. I did the whole one-man team thing to learn the ropes. But I quickly realized I grew up watching shows like No Reservations, like Jamie Oliver's Italian, actual series shows, structured outlines of a 22 to 45-minute episode. If you look at FEATRs videos, you see that. Mm-hmm. You see that, what's it called?
Correlation.
Yeah, you see that correlation, because we aim to create TV quality caliber content online, right? And now, ironically, it's looking at that and seeing how does that now live on TV or streaming, right? And so those are the types of videos that we want to do, the types of documentaries that we want to do, and we would love for it to have a larger platform somewhere else.
Okay, aside from people saying online that your content or FEATRs content is Erwan-centric or Erwan style, how would you describe the content or the style of FEATR? Is there a distinct style?
Yes and no. one of the key things when I was setting up Feature in the Packet Insight Studios was to make sure to hire people who are way better than me in anything that I do, right? If people were asking me what is my role, aside from running the company, like if I was to place myself in a production role, I'd be what you call a showrunner.
Okay.
Like, so it's kind of like an executive producer, but more has influence in terms of how the episode goes. Because I think my strength is looking at an overall story from a top-down approach and understanding what are the missing elements and what do we need to shoot. But we work with cinematographers that are way better than me and then producers that are way better than me. And so everyone that is in Feature has the creative license to do whatever the hell they want, right? There's no structure. We have meetings where we're like, what do you want to do? What story do you want to do? Oh, I want to do a story about Poblacion. So we have a documentary coming out about Poblacion, which is not necessarily food related, but just more of kind of like its CD pass and how it's become this trendy thing now.
How it became Poblacion.
Correct. So it's a 45-minute video with lots of interviews. It's really cool. And that was, maybe I got involved in 20% of it. 80% of it was really the producers, the directors, and everything. So we don't necessarily have a style. We all have a North Star that we follow, and that's how do you best tell this story in a way that it impacts the community. So that's what everyone's going towards. And then once you understand that, in terms of style, treatment, how we want to do it, it's fine. But obviously, we all learn from each other. So obviously, the videos will all start morphing and start looking a little bit similar in terms of visual aspects and stuff like that.
So basically, it's just that you're following one North Star, and then you could do whatever you want, but simply you're basically evolving.
Correct. And then we strategize, we look at post reports, and we're like, okay, what do we fine tune? What do we change? What went wrong? What went right? How do we approach the next videos? Yeah.
So at the end of the day, what lasting impression do you wish for Feature to create?
I think our generation is very different from my parents' generation. I don't care about legacy. Like, if people forget who I am in 10 years, so be it, whatever. But I think I care about sustainable impact. So it's not necessarily about the brand, who we are, what we do, but what kind of impact we can bring to what we're doing. And so, I hope that we influence things in very soft ways. I hope that, and it's happened, right? Like the salt thing. The law was passed that now allows artisanal salts to be legal and legitimate. Ridiculous, but it's passed, right? Marcos signed it, I think, earlier this year. And so that just shows you the soft power that can come from the work that we do. And so I hope that still stays there. You never really see us being very politically involved in our videos, but we say things that we hope fall in the right ears. So like, if we do a video about, I don't know, somewhere in Guimaras or something, we say something like, oh, I wish this could be better. And we hope that, because we know it happens, we know the governors or the mayors are watching the video, we hope that sparks something and that drives action, right? And that's the same for any community that is involved in our videos and watches our videos. We hope that it sparks something and hopefully creates whatever kind of sustainability that they need, whether it's business, economic, or livelihood. Right?
What's your advice to upcoming food content creators?
I think in the beginning, figure yourself out. Figure out what you like to do, what do you bring to the table, and just experiment. To be able to experiment, it can't be a job because you can't take yourself seriously in the beginning because you're still figuring out who you are. So I think start it as a hobby, start it as a passion. Once you start getting paid for the work that you do, very quickly determine what your brand identity is and do it authentically. Don't do it because it's a trend. Like, don't start cooking Filipino food all of a sudden just because it's a trend, but do it because you really want to learn like about your country, about your culture, because that authenticity, I don't care who you are, but that authenticity, people can see through it. And whether it's everyone that can see through it, probably not, but your peers will see through it. Like, I can watch content and I've very easily called people's BS. I'm like, okay, you're doing that. I know why you're doing that. And so be true to yourself, be true to the type of content that you want to create, be extremely passionate about it. And if you want to do this sustainably, think about how this outgrows you. I think that's very key. Honestly, with how things are moving, I don't think someone can be a content creator for the rest of their life. You need to become something else, whether that's a cookbook author, whether it's a filmmaker, whether it's a producer, it becomes an amalgamation of things. So what does that look like for you as a content creator in food specifically? What industry you're getting in, which the food industry, which is extremely broad. You can go from restaurants to canned products to making fish sauce, right? There's so many different things you can do. So understand how this career becomes sustainable for you if you want it to be sustainable. And look at, and I'm not kidding here, look at the 10, 20-year timeline and ask yourself, if I'm 25 now, when I'm 45, do I still want to make tanghulu on a camera? Or
do I want for the camera while cooking?
Yeah, or do something else. And you know, I'm kind of making fun of it because I made tanghulu a couple days ago. A couple months ago. But it was the original tanghulu using the hawthorn, which is the fruit that makes haw flakes, right? Which I found really interesting. And so I took it from a historical approach, but I was kind of making fun of the trend by making it historical, whatever. It was like a meta thing that no one got. But I still, like I said a while ago when we were talking off cam, I still shoot my own content at home because it keeps the fire alive in me, and it just reminds me of the early days of why I was doing it and when I was doing it. And a lot of things I shoot at home, it's unpaid. It's just to keep my platform updated because I think, one, that's important, but it's also for me a repository of recipes and ingredients and how I'm growing as a person. And so that's my timeline. But what I do on my platform, that's fun. That's pure fun because I grew a platform that's bigger than me, which is FEATR, right? So that's FEATR is my content creating like platform now. Erwan is a shit poster that just has fun on his platform. Exactly. And so I'm lucky that I was able to separate that and grow that. Yeah.
Okay, last one. I'm really curious since you said karinderya.
Go.
What's your go-to karinderya order?
Go-to karinderya order?
Yes.
I mean, I'm a simple man. Anything that's like liempo, because that's usually pretty good wherever you go. And then I'll usually have whatever soup that they're having that's there. Like if it's a sinigang or bulalo or tinola, I'm on it. But my favorite, if it's there, I love trying okoy.
Okoy.
All over the country, because everyone does it really differently. From your super crispy, craggly, pockety okoys to your like pancakey okoys. And so I like understanding the differences between them.
Because they also use sometimes the shrimp or sometimes like small fishes.
Yeah.
The big shrimps.
Correct. So I think the big shrimps are an issue. I think unless you're removing the shells, but if you're using the shells, please use the small ones. Because I hate eating okoy and then having sugat all over my mouth, and then you're eating and then you're putting sinamak and you're like, fuck, that vinegar is attacking me right now.
But yeah, thank you so much, Erwan, for your time. Maraming salamat, and that's it for our podcast. Thank you, Erwan. I'm really glad that you joined us here. Very insightful conversation, and hopefully for our listeners, they also enjoy this one. So,
Perfect.
Erwan, I'm pretty sure a lot of people know you and what you do, but for some, maybe you could plug here and tell us your socials and other stuff.
So check us out on FEATR Media. All the documentary, cultural, food work that we put out is on there. Follow us also on TF Guy Studios on Instagram if you want to learn more about the BTS aspect, the collaborative aspect of everything that we do. We're an overly communicative bunch. So if you want to know what we're up to, just look it up and you'll very quickly see who we are and what we stand for.
All right, so thank you so much, Erwan. Maraming salamat. Yeah, that's it.
Thank you.
That's it for us, guys. We'll see you again soon. Bye.
If you enjoyed this podcast, don't forget to follow all our socials at Bitesized.PH para updated kayo sa new episodes namin. See you in the next episode, foodies. Bye!